It's time to talk about some scams that are really easy to fall for. Let's get right to it with number 5, $25,000 transfer. Aussie Teen Aurora Casilli was defrauded of her life savings after falling for a phone scam. She'd been saving the money for years and had planned to use it to buy her own house. Aurora had been working since she was 14 and sometimes even held multiple jobs. She did all of that for one reason: to fatten her savings account and take her closer to her dream of purchasing her own home. But now, all of that work might have gone down the drain, as she now has nothing to her after falling victim to fraud. One day, Aurora was making breakfast when she got a text from her bank. The text came from the same number her bank usually sent her texts with and belonged to the same text thread on her phone. The text said that the bank was worried that there was someone with a different name trying to get access to her funds. The message directed her to call a number so she could get everything sorted out. It was even in the same form as her bank's previous messages. So, Aurora called the number on the text and was greeted with the same prompts that calling her bank typically came with. She was even put on hold for about an hour. Today, she knows that was probably part of a plan to give more legitimacy to the operation. Because what sort of con man puts a potential victim on hold for an hour? When Aurora finally connected with someone on the other side, she was greeted by a professional and polite man with a British accent. She'd always believed that scammers spoke with foreign accents and broken English, so this gave the call even more legitimacy. Unfortunately, the call wasn't coming from the bank. The man told Aurora that her account was under attack and that for her safety, she should transfer all her money to a new account the man set up in her name, as per protocol. The account was supposedly at the same bank as her current account, so the security steps made sense. So Aurora transferred the money to the new account and sealed the fate of her savings. After hanging up, she looked up the details of the new account and discovered that it was at another bank and under another name. So she called the man back and tried to ask him why he'd given her an account at a different bank. But he hung up. So she called again and he hung up again. That's when realization hit her like a ton of undercooked pancakes. No amount of butter and syrup was gonna save her. Aurora reported the scam to her bank and they conducted their investigations. In the report they gave her, the bank determined that since she had authorized the transfer herself, the bank wasn't at fault. They also told her that there was nothing they could do to help her retrieve those funds. The money had been removed from the account it was sent to, and there was no way to get it back. However, they did offer her $2,000, but she turned the money down. The scammer was never held accountable. Number 4, second-hand tickets. Ray McDonald and his friends were scammed out of £19,000 after purchasing 19 fake Champions League finals tickets for £1,000 each. Ray and his friends had already bought a total of 40 legitimate tickets from the sellers, so there was never any reason to be suspicious. However, the boys realized that they'd been scammed when the page selling the tickets was deleted on Twitter. Ray was about to go to sleep when he heard the news and tried to contact the person who had sold him the tickets, but the phone number was no longer in service. Ray and his friends weren't the only ones to get scammed by scalpers claiming to have original tickets for football games. This particular scalper had added Ray and his friends to a WhatsApp group of 50 members, all of whom got scammed of roughly the same amount. When Ray shared the news that he had been conned, he got thousands of messages from friends and family who claimed to have fallen victim to the same scam. Many of them had bought tickets for more than £1,000, and all the money was gone, never to be recovered. Ray contacted his bank and tried to recover the money paid, but it was a lost cause. The bank said because he had authorized the transaction himself, there was nothing they could do about it. Liverpool FC has called on social media companies to block social media accounts involved in selling or offering to sell Champions League match tickets. The scammers who got Ray and his friends simply took advantage of a second-hand ticket market that's been easy to scam for years. If they wanted to watch a bunch of grown men faking injuries for an hour and a half, they could have just watched a professional wrestling match. Number 3, the Lebanese Loop. Ray Connolly was a former scriptwriter who had spent some time writing elaborate cons for 90s shows such as Perfect Scoundrels. So he isn't the sort of person you think would be taken in by a scam. But that's exactly what happened to him. One day, Ray and his wife were out and about and searching for somewhere to park their car. What they found was a paid parking lot. Ray didn't have cash on him to pay for parking, and the machine at the spot they wanted to park was defective. What a predicament. As the couple stood by the defective ATM, a man approached them asking if they needed any help. They explained the situation, and the guy said that the machines in the area were often defective. However, he had a solution. He would take them to another machine where Ray's wife could use her bank card to pay for parking. Ray believed him because he thought the guy was a parking machine engineer or maintenance guy or something. Some kind of official wandering ATM parking lot guy. They're everywhere. When they arrived at the other machine, Ray's wife slotted her debit card into it and entered her PIN. But the machine ate the card like he was Mr. Toilet Man. Our apologies to those few people born in the 80s who were scarred by this obscure reference. Anyways, the seemingly helpful man now made a call to someone who Ray believed was a colleague of the man's that worked on the parking machines in the area. The colleague told Ray and his wife to go back and wait by their car. He said that someone would soon be there to help her retrieve her card. Ray didn't realize it at the time, but he and his wife had just fallen for a scam that's commonly called the Lebanese Loop. In the meantime, the man who helped them left for other business. After 20 minutes, Ray and his wife became suspicious and left the area. That's when Ray logged into his wife's account and found a charge of over £350. 215 pounds had been withdrawn from an ATM 15 minutes earlier, and a further £77 had been spent on groceries. The couple had fallen for a somewhat complex scam. The scam starts with a mark, which was the victim about to be defrauded. The scammers then find a way to get their mark to use a debit card on a parking machine that has been rigged beforehand. In Ray's case, the premise used was that the parking lot machine was defective and the rigged one functioned properly. The fraudsters rigged the parking machines by inserting devices that stop cards from getting ejected. So when the mark uses their debit card on the machine, they are unable to retrieve it. Once this is done, the scammer retrieves the debit card from the machine secretly. In this fraud, the scammer makes sure he sees the PIN number being entered in so that when he retrieves the card, he can use it on other machines. In Ray's case, the con man saw Ray's wife entering the PIN, and his colleague on the phone, who asked them to wait beside their car, only did that so that the fraudster could retrieve the card from the machine without anyone noticing. Ray reported the incident to the bank, and the police found out that the fraud was all too common in the area. They tried to review the CCTV footage and found out that the man in question was wearing a wide hat and a nose mask, so it was impossible to identify him. In the end, the loss wasn't permanent as the bank reimbursed Ray's wife. At least the scammers bought groceries, so that makes it okay, right? Maybe the guy was a modern-day Aladdin or something. Number 2. Hard to be insensitive. Amanda Riley faked cancer for about 7 years to rake in thousands of dollars in donations. Her scam was simple but surprisingly effective. Amanda claimed that she suffered from Hodgkin's lymphoma, type of cancer, and asked for donations from friends and family to treat it. Her family members, friends, and even church members donated cash to the cause. But instead of using the cash for her phantom cancer treatment, she spent it all on personal expenses. Amanda didn't just ask people to donate to her funds indirectly. She held pretty successful fundraising drives to get the money. She organized several in-person fundraisers, including some at the church, which is pretty wild if you think about it. All in all, Amanda got about 400 donations that totaled more than $106,000. She got money from organizations on Facebook, a CrossFit fundraiser, raffles, various sales, and even eBay auctions. Amanda posted photos of medications, photos of her in the hospital receiving treatment, and even shaved her hair to show the effects of the phantom chemotherapy sessions she was having. That's dedication to the art if we've ever seen one. Amanda didn't just post pictures and organize fundraisers. She also built a pretty impressive online profile for her fake illness. She launched a blog titled Lymphoma Can Suck It and made sure to document her fake journey on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. She also falsified medical documents and forged doctor's notes to make her phantom illness as real as possible. According to her support page, Amanda had been diagnosed once before and had a brief remission before the illness came back with a vengeance as stage 4 metastatic cancer. Amanda's lies were never questioned, even when people became suspicious. No one wants to be the guy to ask a person suffering from cancer to prove it. It's a bad look. Amanda's family was so convinced that she was telling the truth that they went as far as suing someone who even questioned the veracity of her claims. Faking cancer is great for the scammer because it's one of those things where if you tried to prove that someone is faking cancer and you're wrong, yeah, not a good look. Unfortunately for Amanda, the IRS didn't care about people's feelings. 6 months after faking cancer and then claiming to be free of cancer, the IRS found out about her scam and sued her in court. The repercussions for her behavior came swiftly. First, she lost her job as a school principal and then had to face an uphill legal battle to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Despite her disgusting lies, Amanda's family still supports her. Her father and brother both wrote statements claiming that they stood by her even though she deceived them all. In the end, she was sentenced to 5 years in jail in order to pay restitution to everyone she scammed. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here for our past release about people who completely took advantage of pandemic help. Number 1. Kidnapped and sent off. Rachel Elwell fell for an audacious scam where she was led to believe her boyfriend had been kidnapped in Ukraine. The entire scheme is so crazy that Rachel has been unrelentingly mocked for her gullibility, and everyone else believes they would have seen right through it. Would you? Rachel met the man who would eventually defraud her of thousands of dollars on Facebook. The man who contacted her was attractive and seemed intelligent. They shared similar interests, and he lived only 25 miles away. However, they didn't meet up because it was during lockdown and there was no rush. Rachel liked that he was open and transparent, and they soon got close. But the con man didn't waste any time getting his con on. First, he told her that he was an engineer and had been flown to Ukraine to work on a UK government contract. Days after he supposedly left the UK, he messaged Rachel and told her that the engineering contract had been forcibly stopped and his equipment was seized. Then he began asking her for small amounts of money. He said that his company would cover the cost of his stay, but he was stranded and would need about £250 for food. Initially, Rachel adamantly refused. She wasn't a dummy and wasn't about to send any money to a guy she never met. But she eventually caved because she felt sorry for his predicament. After a few days, he came up with another story. This time, he said that loan sharks in Ukraine had kidnapped him. He tried to sell the story as best he could by sending her pictures from his cell. In the cell, he was sitting on a thin mattress and generally looked like he was having an awful time. He then sent her documents from the Ministry of Finance in Ukraine showing that he owed about £102,940. Afterwards, he called her and started begging and crying for her to help pay off the loan. So Rachel panicked, borrowed tens of thousands of pounds from different banks, and found a way to send it to him. She even got her sister into it and convinced her to send part of the money as well. Ultimately, Rachel sent him over £100,000. She discovered she'd been scammed when lockdown ended, and she drove over to his house. There, she met a lady who told her she'd never met the man Rachel described. Rachel's stomach sank to the floor. She reported the case to the police and banks, but found limited help. The bank did write off some of the loans, but ultimately decided that they couldn't help her any further. Interestingly, the banks warned her that she might be falling for a scam when she was making the transfers, but she didn't heed the several warnings she got. Rachel has appealed the decision and is currently waiting for a response. Most people who have heard Rachel's story agree with the banks. They believe that she was gullible and shouldn't have fallen for the scam. Here are a few people who completely took advantage of the pandemic. Number 4. A family affair. 3 days after Congress approved the $2.2 trillion economic relief package during the pandemic in March 2020, Richard Avizan and his wife Marietta Terabellian applied for a $112,000 loan using the aliases Lulia Zadko and Victoria Couchko. The first loan was filed for top-quality contracting. 1 day later, Zadko and Couchko requested a $150,000 loan for journeyman construction. Since the government was in a hurry to provide economic relief, the loans were approved almost immediately. The huge federal loan deposits put sparkles in the couple's eyes. They spent the free money almost as fast as it poured in. Meanwhile, they kept filing loan applications using sham companies. By August 2020, they applied for 151 loans totaling more than $18 million in pandemic relief funds. They invested $640,000 of the money in a Mediterranean-style hillside villa in Tarzana, California, with a view of the valley. They bought gold coins, diamond earrings, wristwatches, and more. One of Avazian's most luxurious purchases was a $35,000 Rolex he bought while on vacation with his wife in Turks and Caicos. They also had $450,000 in cash stuffed in grocery bags littered across their property. They went on fancy tropical vacations and bought more high-end items for themselves. The FBI started trailing Avzian and Terabellian after noticing suspicious amounts of money entering their accounts. For months, Authorities searched their trash and bank records until they had enough evidence for a case. The couple was on their way home from a Caribbean beach vacation when they were flagged by customs during a layover in Miami. Customs agents led them away to search their luggage and phones. They discovered the couple was carrying credit cards in the names of their aliases, Lulia Zadko and Victoria Couchko, the same names they used to fill out millions of dollars in loan applications. It seemed Avzian and Terabellian were operating a family fraud ring that hadn't properly covered its tracks. After hours of questioning, Avzian and Terabellian were arrested and held in jail for the night. But 2 weeks later, FBI agents and a SWAT team showed up at the family's Tarzana's estate in the early morning and raided the couple's 2.6-acre property. Terabellian, who was out on bail at the time, ran out the back door and tossed a grocery bag into the bushes. Agents located the grocery bag and emptied it, finding almost $500,000 in cash. The kids and the family dog emerged from the house and stood on the pool deck as authorities ransacked the home looking for evidence. On June 25, 2021, a Los Angeles federal court convicted Avzian, Terabellian, and 2 relatives of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, conspiracy to launder money, and other crimes. 4 accomplices also pleaded guilty. In total, the FBI arrested 8 different people involved with the scam. The jury decided that the government could confiscate the house, jewelry, gold, and all other items purchased with the pandemic relief money that should have been used to save American businesses and careers. The criminal case became a family scandal when Avzian's younger brother, Artur, took the witness stand and blamed most of the scam on his wife, Tamara Dadyan. The already strained marriage between Artur and Dadyan worsened when they blamed each other for the family fraud ring. Artur insisted that Dadyan committed all of the crimes on her side of the house while he ran his trucking business outside of the home. When asked about the photos of fake IDs on his phone, he blamed his wife again. He said she never showed him any of the government loan applications she filed. But when loan deposits were made to his bank account, he had no problem spending them. He received $285,000 in pandemic relief funds and admitted to using some of it to buy supplies and repairs for his trucking company. He also bought a $24,000 Harley-Davidson motorcycle. He invested $93,000 of it in an escrow company to help his brother purchase their Tarzana hillside estate. After sentencing in June 2021, Dadyan was supposed to report to prison in January 2022 to serve a 10-year prison sentence. But she never arrived. By February 2022, she was declared a fugitive and fled to Europe. Her whereabouts were unknown, and the FBI offered a $20,000 reward for any tips related to her disappearance. Dadyan convinced her brother-in-law, Richard Avzian, and his wife, Terabellian, to go on the run with her. Federal employees believe the 3 of them cut off their ankle monitor bracelets after their convictions in June. Authorities finally found them in February 2022 in Montenegro. Spanish officials deported them to the U.S. shortly after. Richard Avzian was sentenced to 17 years in prison, and Terabellian was sentenced to 6. Artur Avzian, Richard's brother and Dadyan's estranged husband, was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. Dadyan was sentenced to 10 years and 10 months. Number 3. Scammer on fire. Our story begins in the Black Summer when massive bushfires tore through Australia between 2019 and 2020. As of October 2020, the fires had burnt up to 84 million acres of land and 5,900 buildings, including 2,779 homes. Sadly, the fires also claimed 24 lives. The blaze also affected 3 billion creatures, mostly reptiles. Some species were driven to extinction, while air quality dropped to hazardous levels. An estimated $103 billion was needed to recover property and economic losses. Millions of Australian lives were affected, and the economy suffered endlessly. This only got worse when COVID-19 struck the continent. On January 6, 2020, the federal government allocated $2 billion for brush fire recovery. The money was divided between primary producers, mental health providers, local governments, charities, financial counselors, young people, and other forms of emergency funding to help get Australian citizens back on their feet. But sometimes, the money didn't end up in the right hands. That's where Ellen Howard comes in. Howard, an unemployed woman in her 30s, applied for relief payments in the states of New South Wales and Victoria, even though she didn't live in either state. She scammed the New South Wales local government by claiming her house burnt down in the bushfires. She forged fake identity documents to prove she lived there and hoped to get her hands on a $10,000 emergency payment. Though Howard's home was damaged from fire, it wasn't from the bushfires. Instead, a domestic dispute between her and an ex-partner led to an accidental fire in the house. Still, she successfully secured the $10,000 payment and then received $93,000 more in subsidies, taking money away from the people who really needed it. Howard's greedy ways escalated when she saw new opportunities for scamming the government during the pandemic. When the Australian state of Victoria went into lockdown during COVID-19, Howard claimed her career was negatively affected, even though she was already unemployed. Howard didn't even live in Victoria. She applied for $450 support payments 13 times, stealing identity documents from family, friends, and total strangers. As a result, some individuals and businesses couldn't make their claims or receive relief money because the government thought those payments had already been sent out. Howard successfully obtained $104,000 and tried to secure $258,000 more in government and charity disaster relief funding. Howard thought the money was simply there for the taking and received the deposits easily after submitting fraudulent applications. And with that money, she went on shopping sprees, such as buying a new wallet from Louis Vuitton and posting it on Facebook. In all, Howard used multiple bank accounts and email addresses to apply for 34 relief payments. Like all of the other scams, the government finally caught up with her. In November 2020, Howard was arrested and refused bail on 16 charges of dishonestly obtaining financial benefit by deception. Police found a ledger full of email addresses used to file fraudulent loan applicants on her when she was arrested. The prosecutor said Howard was in a world of trouble. She failed to show up to court several times, and multiple warrants were issued for her arrest. The legal aid lawyer proposed very strict bail conditions, which were denied to add more restrictions to her internet use. She pleaded guilty to 11 counts of fraudulently claiming bushfire payments in New South Wales and 13 counts of fraudulently claiming lockdown payments in Victoria. She admitted to 16 dishonesty charges that amounted to $250,000 in funds from the Tasmanian government and charities. Number 2. Unvaccinated. 2 New York nurses took advantage of their role in the pandemic and made more than $1.5 million in crafting fake vaccination cards. They obtained real vaccine doses, CDC vaccination cards, and syringes from the New York State Department of Health. However, they skipped the first part of the process, the vaccination part, and went right to the cards. Marissa Uraro wrote out the fake CDC cards, and her boss, Julie Duvuano, input the fake information into the New York State Health Department database. Duvuano was a nurse practitioner who owned Wild Child Pediatric Healthcare in Amityville, Long Island, where Uraro worked as a nurse. 2 nurses teamed up to sell fake adult vaccination cards for $220 each and children's cards for $85 each. Then, they'd enter the information into the New York Health System's website, so it was on record that these patients received the vaccine even though they didn't. The women made over $1.5 million in profits from the scheme. This equates to roughly 6,800 adult vaccination cards or 17,000 pediatric cards. Since they ran a pediatric facility, they probably handed out the cards to entire families. Let's say a family equals 2 adults and 2 kids. That means they handed out fake vaccine cards to about 2,400 families, charging $610 per family. With all these fake cards floating around Long Island, someone probably showed off or talked about what the nurses at Wild Child Pediatric were doing. Not only that, but local businesses noticed an odd number of patients entering Wild Child Pediatric and reported their suspicions to the police. Duvuano and Uraro's criminal activity was uncovered when they wrote out a fake vaccination card for an undercover detective who never received the jab. Then, police obtained a search warrant for Duvuano's home. They discovered nearly $1 million in cash on a ledger showing almost $1.5 million in profits when they entered. The nursing duo apparently ran the scheme since November 2021. They were arrested in January 2022, pleaded not guilty, and released without bail. A third accomplice was receptionist Brooke Hogan, who also was arrested for her help in conducting the fake vaccination card scam. She was charged with felony forgery as well. Plot twist. Duvuano's husband is an NYPD officer being investigated for potentially helping his wife fly under the radar and even referring potential customers to her. The Suffolk County District Attorney publicly shamed the nurses for using their jobs to endanger public health, even though they were supposed to be protecting it. And for what? To make a buck? Uraro's attorney asked the public to consider his client's career and all of her contributions to healthcare before this scandal. Number 1. The Mayor's Daughter. When the U.S. government announced the PPP program, Tamara Holness decided she wanted a piece of the pie. Tamara, the former mayor of Broward County, Florida's daughter, at the time she owned Holness Consulting Inc., a political consulting firm operating out of South Florida. However, the firm was inactive and had been since 2018. Then, when the government announced the PPP program, Holness Consulting suddenly appeared back on the map. In her online application, Holness said her company employed 18 people and paid out $120,000 in payroll each month during 2019, a year when the business was not operational. In return, Holness got a juicy check for $300,000. All it took were a few fraudulent payroll tax forms and a frantic federal government. However, Holness knew she had to clean the money. So, in a sewed money laundering scheme, she paid 22 different people $1,300 every 2 weeks. They'd cash their checks, pocket $300, and give Holness the other $1,000. The U.S. was ripe with COVID relief fraud. It wasn't long before the COVID-19 Fraud Enforcement Task Force caught up to her. Her lawyer called it an act of desperation rather than greed, saying most of the money went toward taxes and housing arrangements. Still, it didn't change the fact that she lied on her application and swindled money away from businesses that needed it. In the end, a judge sentenced Holness to 20 months in jail and ordered her to pay back the $300,000 she stole. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you think it's a scam if someone knows a friend zone friend likes them, but they accept free meals and gifts anyways.